where the hell are we going? We are going to literally the middle of nowhere. We're going to a place in the steppe, in the semi-desert area of southern Kazakhstan. This place is super remote. It's one of the most remote places that I've ever been. And if you look at the map here in Google Maps, you can see that there really isn't much. If you zoom in, you see some villages and some things popping up, but the reason Baikonur Cosmodrome is here is that there is a lot of nothing. It's a great place to launch. Now, you also have to remember that in the days that Baikonur Cosmodrome was built in the 1950s, Kazakhstan was part of the Soviet Union. And this is one of the most southern spots in the Soviet Union, in the former Soviet Union. And as we all learn in spaceflight, the further south you can launch your rockets, the more speed acceleration you get from the rotation of the Earth. So you want to be as close to the equator as possible. And in the case of the Soviet Union, you wanted to be as far south in the country as possible. But there was another issue in the 1950s, and that was called the Cold War, because these programs in those days were highly secretive, and the enemy, mostly the US and the West, was not supposed to know that the Russians were actually working on this, because the early days of spaceflight was very much related to the military evolution and the evolution of military equipment, mostly intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that would carry nuclear weapons to the enemy. And of course, the place where you want to launch these things should remain secret. So in the early 1950s, and this is a photo of an old German language map of the Soviet Union, you see a town called Baikonur here circled in red. And Baikonur was an ancient early 20th century mining town in the middle of nowhere in Kazakhstan, about 400 kilometers north of where the Cosmodrome was built. And they picked the name Baikonur as one of the ways to confuse the enemy of where Baikonur was, where the Cosmodrome and the launch sites were. In case someone would open his mouth and use that name, then still the enemy would be confused as to where exactly that was. Baikonur was built in the 1950s, initially purely military, to launch intercontinental ballistic missiles, but very early on in the Soviet space program, it started to be used for more civil uses as well. And as we all know, in 1957, the first rocket launched there. And in those early days of spaceflight, there was nothing there. There was a small Kazakh fishing town in those days, and this is at the entrance of Baikonur City, called the Fisherman Statue. Although it does depict an astronaut, it's called the Fisherman Statue to remember the early beginnings of the Kazakh town of Tyuratam, as it's locally known, which is on the Darsyria River, where a few fishermen started trading in the early 20th century, and this is where the Russians decided to build the Cosmodrome. The reason they decided to build it here is that this small fishing town is on the main railway from the heart of Russia to Tashkent. And that railway line existed, and they needed the trains to transport equipment and people and everything into this barren, remote place. When we talk about Baikonur, we talk about two things. Mostly we talk about the Cosmodrome. The Cosmodrome is a massive area in the steppe. It's about 100 kilometers wide by 50 kilometers deep. So 50 kilometers north to south, 100 kilometers east to west. And there is just a lot of space. There is a lot of nothing. The town of Baikonur that houses all the workers that keep this site going is on the river. As you can see, the Kazakh name of Tyuratam is here, and Baikonur was built right outside that place. And this is what the place really looks like. Most of it looks like this. This is a picture in winter. You'll see the seasons shift back and forth all the time. I've made a few trips to Baikonur to see different launches. Somewhere in winter, somewhere in summer. the difference in climate is very extreme, where the winters can be very cold, the summers can be very hot. There's very little precipitation, so this is about the amount of snow that you would usually see there, and it's because it's far away from any oceans. It's usually very dry. But this is what it looks like. It's flat. There's a lot of nothing. There's camels roaming around the Cosmodrome quite freely, and this is what most of the place actually looks like. So it's not filled with rocket launch pads and buildings, but this is what most of the Cosmodrome looks like. This is a map of the city, and it doesn't really matter what's in all these little squares, but the red line is relevant right now because after 1992, when Kazakhstan became independent from Russia, the launch site suddenly was located in a different country, and the Soviets, or the Russians at that point, had the problem of their main gateway to space suddenly being located in another independent country. So what they did when Kazakhstan gained independence from the Soviet Union in the early 90s is Russia leased the territory of the Cosmodrome and of the city, two different spots, because the Kazakhstan is right in between the two, but they leased the grounds and they built a border fence around it, a border wall, with gateways, and they pay the Kazakh government every year a big amount of money to continue to use both the city and the Cosmodrome for the Russian space program. It also means that Baikonur City and Baikonur Cosmodrome is Russian territory. So when you travel there, you do have to have special permits to enter a different country. It's basically a border control when you enter or leave the city, and again if you enter or leave the Cosmodrome. It's difficult to get in there. You do need special permits, so don't travel there on your own thinking that if you have a Russian visa you will be allowed into Baikonur. That's not the case. You need a special permission from Roscosmos, from the Russian space authorities, to be allowed to enter the city. Baikonur was built in the 1950s, 1960s. It had its heydays in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and that's reflected in the way the city looks like. I mean, this is your traditional Soviet Union main square, which is the main square in Baikonur, where the Lenin statue still stands in the middle of the square, overlooking the place, as if nothing has changed in the early 90s. It very much has the look and feel of the old Soviet Union still. It's also a space city, and that's the exciting bit about Baikonur, and that's why I love to come back there every time, because it is littered with space monuments. Space monuments like this is an actual Soyuz rocket that has been put up on a pedestal in the middle of town. It's called the Soyuz Monument, but it is really a leftover model of an actual early model Soyuz rocket. Pretty exciting to have that in the middle of your town. The local hero is everywhere. There's statues of him, but also the local tradespeople. To the right, you see a sign of a butcher shop with Yuri Gagarin underneath. This was for the 50th anniversary in 1961, 2011. I was there for the first time in 2011, and Gagarin was everywhere. You can see that this town lives and breathes space, and be it in Russia, be it in the US, be it in Europe, be it in India and China, space people talk to space people, you immediately have this connection. And that is no different in Baikonur. And everybody who lives in Baikonur is related to space. So for a space geek like me, it's a pretty exciting place to be.